Eighth picture, end of summer. We were frenzied that last week in August. That was Izzy's word, frenzied, and I drew it all. Stephen and I racing along the dirt road to buy beef jerky at the grocery store 4 miles away, sitting on a rock, pulling the jerky against our teeth as we counted the cars that went by on the highway, rowing up the river rapids and bouncing back into the rowboats with bruises all over our legs and arms, climbing partway up the old man's mountain after the rain, slipping and sliding in the mud on the edge of the road, and we never stopped laughing. Anything so we wouldn't have to think about my leaving. Anything. They told me what they'd planned, the four of us sitting on a bench. I never needed a picture of that night. It was in my head, every bit of it, in there forever. But I drew it anyway. Izzy with one of my hands in both of hers, the old man reaching out to hug me until I had no breath left, and Stephen blinking back behind his glasses, trying not to let me see how close to tears he was. But I knew. I drew another picture of what happened next. Before I could think, I leaned over to kiss Stephen's cheek, stained with grease from working on the truck, captured there in that drawing forever. Both of us laughed, embarrassed, and Izzy said, "Lovely, I'm going to try that too." And she leaned over to kiss his other cheek. We were still laughing as Izzy spread out her long arms. "It's settled then," she said. "You belong with us, this house." "And the river," I said. "Is yours," the old man said, "all of it." "And Izzy's hard candy," Stephen said, rocking back on his chair, looking happier than he had all summer. "Please let it be all right," I begged, looking at Stephen's face, remembering all the arguments he said and the old man had had. A lost lure yesterday, a rake left in the rain, the truck. Was it because I was there? Was the old man comparing him with me? Me. Wasn't that strange? Was trying to fit me into a family like jamming a puzzle piece in that didn't match? Would it ruin all the other pieces? I looked up at the mountain. The trees had just a hint of fall color. The mountain looked soft, almost friendly. I thought about standing on the very top. Izzy leaned over. "Hey, you two. Don't look sad. We still have one last weekend, remember? The last weekend. Last." The Time with Josie, Chapter 9. Never mind that we didn't have much money. Never mind that I didn't even know exactly how to get into the house at Branches. I'd find it. Never mind that the house wasn't mine. "Please don't mind," I said to Izzy and the old man in my head. I ticked off what to pack, what to do, counting in my fingers. Bring all the food in the cabinet over the sink. A map, winter clothes, piles of anything warm I could find in the house. Then get gas at the first exit off the highway. Josie was in the kitchen making cocoa. "It'll be dark soon," she said. "That's all right," I told her. We like the dark. It's like velvet." "That it is," she said. "And we like the snow, too." I bit my lip. Dark and snow. One problem after another. "How about marshmallows in our cocoa?" Josie asked. "Left-hand cabinet," I said. To begin with, Josie and I had to get off at Long Island. I knew that. We had to get to Route 17 and exit at 90, and after that we were home free. I had walked the last few miles dozens of times. The grocery store off the ramp, the road curving over the hill. We'd cross the bridge and the house would be there, nestled in the trees opposite the old man's mountain. I could do it in my sleep. I called back over my shoulder, reminding Josie where we were going. "It's a house in the woods, Josie," I said. "A house on the river. A safe house." I swept half boxes of cereal off the counter into a carton, cans of chicken noodle soup, sugar, salt, anything I could find to eat. Then, wasting precious time, went up to the attic for Josie's old Christmas ornaments. I heard a car and froze on the top step. The sound of the motor grew louder and then gradually disappeared. My heart was beating fast. "Stop," I told myself. The mustard woman was far away in her house somewhere, scarfing up her dinner, littering her sweatsuit with crumbs. But I knew we should leave as quickly as we could. I'd learned that when I'd run before. The first hours made all the difference, the hours before anyone knew you were gone. I scurried into the attic, found the box of ornaments, and pulled it after me to the stairs. When I finished, the car was piled so high it was hard to see out the windows. It was completely dark in the kitchen. It was completely dark, except for the white flakes hitting the window. In the kitchen, Josie was bent over the table, a cup of cocoa in hand, her knife in the other, and the smooth chunk of wood in front of her. Josie? I reached for my own cup of cocoa and sipped at it, feeling the warmth of it on my lip, the sweetness of the marshmallow in my mouth. I touched her shoulder. We can't wait any more. Rubbing her eyes, she glanced toward her bedroom. I knew she wanted to take a nap. I did too. I was tired now. Thinking of the long trip ahead of us was almost too much. We'll have an adventure, I said. You and me and Henry. I hesitated. If we don't go, they might make me live somewhere else. She stood up. We'll go then. She looked around at the kitchen, touched the table and the back of the chair. Yes, she said, we'll go. Can you drive? I asked. Please let the snow stop, I thought. She smiled, of course. I made one last trip to the car, carrying her knives, the small drill, pieces of wood, and then I was back, hoisting Henry onto my shoulder. No biting, if you don't mind, I told him. We went outside, Josie looking up at the sky, holding out her hands to catch flakes, while I opened the garage doors, and then we were off, skidding our way down the street. Suddenly the snow did stop, and we saw a moon over our heads. It looks dusty, said Josie. The house stood out as clearly as if it were daytime. Trees threw sharp shadows across the snowy lawns, and the dark streets curved like ribbons through the white world. I put my head back against the headrest, thinking we'd done it. The hardest part was over. Do you know about directions? I asked. She turned her head to one side. It depends. I know the way to the end of Long Island. I know how to get upstate. Upstate, yes. Across the Triborough Bridge, she said. She frowned, looking worried. Isn't that right? I think so. Henry was scratching around in back, trying to make room for himself. There's a map somewhere. Josie leaned across me, one hand off the wheel. I can find it, I said quickly, reaching for the glove compartment. A tiny pinprick of light appeared as I opened it. The small space inside was filled with all kinds of things. One of Josie's silk gloves, a couple of dimes, a squished box of tissues, and at the very bottom, the map of New York State. I unfolded it, spreading it out against the door of the glove compartment. It was a mass of color and lines and tiny words that were hard to see in that dim light. I bent over it, squinting. Palisades Parkway, Route 17. It was all there, one line after another, leading me home to Branches. I looked up as I heard a blast of the horn, and then a car swerved right past us, its light sweeping over the road. Are you all right? I asked Josie. Right as rain, she said. I sat back and closed my eyes, thinking of Izzy, drawing them all in my mind, wondering if they'd think I was doing a terrible thing. It belongs to you, the old man had said. Would he say that now, I wondered? Why not, Stephen said in my mind. Izzy's face in front of mine, would she say, Do it, Hollis? I thought she would. I was doing it anyway. Suddenly I sat up straight. How much gas did we have? It was almost a miracle to see a mobile sign off to the right. I touched Josie's arm, pointing, and we pulled off the road, waiting for the attendant to fill the tank while I counted out my running money. Good idea, Josie said, and I had to smile at her. She'd have driven until the tank was empty and might have never remembered. I was hungry now, really hungry. The hot chocolate hadn't lasted long, and I hadn't had lunch. Maybe I could hurry inside for a bag of potato chips and a chocolate bar. I glanced out the rearview mirror to see a car pulling up behind us at the pump. The man was impatient, tapping his horn for us to get out of the way. There'd be no time to buy anything, not even enough time to rummage through the back to find bags of food. I thought of the mustard woman. She'd come up the path tomorrow afternoon to get me, trying to smile, acting as if it would be a lovely afternoon tea at that woman's house. What was her name? Eleanor. When we didn't answer the bell, maybe she'd go around the back to see if we were in Josie's garden. But soon enough she'd figure out that we weren't there. She'd stand on tiptoe to look in the window of the garage, and it would be empty. And if we were lucky, she'd wait a while. She might think we'd be back any minute. But the minutes would stretch to an hour, and then she'd know. She'd really know. And then she'd call the police. My hands were damp. Calm down, I made Stephen tell me in my mind. You knew all this before you started. But Josie turned onto the parkway now, and it wouldn't be that long before we crossed the bridge and left Long Island. Maybe 20 minutes. and the mustard woman would be getting ready for bed. Next to me in the dim light, I couldn't see the lines around Josie's eyes or the ones crisscrossing her forehead. I could pretend we were taking a moonlight ride in the Silver Bullet, pretend Josie was all right and we weren't running. The last time I had run was 2 weeks after what had happened in Branches. It was September, still hot, with the sun beating down from early morning until dark. It was hard to move, hard to think. Everything hurt in my head and my chest. I'd had enough of the stucco woman, and I knew she'd had enough of me. All I could think about was being somewhere cold, a place where I could scoop up a chunk of snow and crush it against my teeth, a place to make the heat and the pain go away. I left at night after the stucco woman had fallen asleep. It gave me hours to get on the road, to find a bus. I was gone for days before they caught me. Maybe we'd be luckier this time. Chapter 10, The Time with Josie. It was late when we reached the exit sign for Branches. The gas station light was out, and there was only a tiny light in the back of the grocery store. We're almost there, I told Josie, just the last 4 miles. Already? She sounded delighted. She zoomed off the ramp, stepping on the shoulder, and in a moment she was asleep, her head against the steering wheel. Henry climbed off my lap where he'd been for the past hour and slid onto hers, his whiskers twitching a little as he closed his eyes. I leaned over and turned the key to stop the motor. Suddenly I was awake and reaching for the door handle. I gave Henry a pat and then I got out of the car. At first it was hard to see, but little by little silhouettes appeared in the sky. The curve of a tree trunk, the dark square of the grocery store ahead, and above us the old man's mountain, raising its head to the sky. It was almost a shock to see it there. Beatrice would have said it was a drawing coming to life. I pictured her in a place with a huge cacti. Saguaro, I thought they were called. I remembered she'd said she would call every Sunday. What would she think when the phone rang and rang? I shook myself. What would happen if I tried to call her again? She'd come home, the dream over. I wasn't going to do that. Back in the car, I nudged Josie awake. I can drive this last bit, I said, and then you can sleep. We drove along the narrow road, no other lights now except for a few houses up on the hills, and I kept talking to keep her awake. We'll see the river. It's not as big as your ocean. Your river. Josie's head bobbled. You keep watching, I told her. We don't want to go off the road. The river would be very cold for a swim. I saw her smile. Henry doesn't have his bathing suit. And there was the bridge. I had stood on that bridge watching the pickerel, the catfish, the muskrat, building his nest of sticks against its base. The old man's bridge. We'll have a fire in the fireplace, I said, and turn the heat up high. I could see the old man flipping the switch in the early mornings when dew was still on the grass and the house was still cold. We thumped against the bridge over the river, and the house was in front of us waiting. Josie, this is the place. My voice was flat. I might have been telling her it was a snowy day or the sun might come out tomorrow, but inside, my heart was thumping. We had just this winter, I knew that, and maybe this spring. By summer, we'd have to find somewhere else. That was months, that was forever. I closed my eyes, remembering the last morning I had been here. I had gone out the screen door toward the car, brushing my fingers again along the holly bushes, feeling the sharp edges of the leaves against my thumb. I had walked as far as the town, a long way in the early morning heat, and sat on the bench with my things on my lap, waiting for the short line bus and looking down. I realized I'd left the drawing box. I think that was the worst moment, knowing I'd never see that box again. Geranium red, dove gray, French blue. We're home, Josie, I said. Hard to see. Just get used to the darkness, I told her. In a minute you'll see it all. She took everything in then, and I was with her. The house with the sloping roof, the evergreens leaning over it, the dark shadow that was the wood pile on the front porch. The rocking chairs were in the shed, I knew that, but I could picture them there, rocking gently. Josie took a deep breath. I knew you'd like it, I said, watching Henry in the rearview mirror. He stood on the back of the headrest now, his claws in my shoulder, his nose twitching, his whiskers quivering, sizing up the place. And you too, Henry. But is it all right? Josie asked, frowning. Are you sure we can do this? We can. I brushed away thoughts of being caught, of what the old man might think of me if he ever found out. What did he think of me anyway? Please don't mind this thing I'm doing, I begged in my head. A red cardinal swooped down to perch on a holly branch that bent itself into the snow marked by thread-like bird prints and deep hollows from the deer. The tracks hugged the edge of the clearing, close to the evergreens, and one path, probably from a rabbit, led to the river. I wondered if Stephen had ever seen the house in the winter. He would love it. I chewed my knuckle. A lace curtain of snow blew against the porch. It was bitter cold with the engine turned off. I had to get Josie into the house. Her shoes had heels with open toes and diamond-shaped cutouts in the sides. Why hadn't I thought of her shoes? Henry scratched his claws along the car window, wanting to get out. I gave his ear a tweak, opened the door, and watched him belly through the snow away from the car. "I'm sorry, Josie," I said, still looking down at her feet. They'd be soaked. "You'll have to walk through this to get to the house." "An adventure," Josie said, grabbing the handle. I slipped her scarf around her head, the orange a bright spot in the darkness, and buttoned up the top button of her coat. "All right," I said. Outside we skirted the trees, and she stopped to look up. "A million stars," she said, pointing. "There's the Dipper and Orion. Beatrice would have loved it." And I held her by the waist as we went up the back steps. Her face was a little disapproving as I kicked my sneaker off and, hopping, smashed in the small kitchen window. And then we were inside, Henry skittering in around us. I leaned back against the wall, reaching for the light, hoping they hadn't turned off the electricity. Suddenly the kitchen sprang to life. The refrigerator began to hum, and beyond it, I could see a huge living room with a long table at one end and dark blue rugs scattered across the wood floor. The old man was proud of that floor. He had always talked about putting it in with Izzy, about matching the pieces of wood exactly, holding up his hands as if Stephen and I could see them, clutching a hammer and a saw. Josie shivered, her lips colorless, and my hands felt numb. I flipped the switch for heat and heard the furnace start up. At the fireplace, chunks of wood and paper were piled in a bin. I knelt there, crumbling the yellowed newspapers to tuck in between some logs, and read last summer's news as I struck a match against the stone of the hearth. Someone had caught a huge trout near Byron's Falls. A sidewalk sale was planned for Main Street. There were canoes for rent in Shadyside. I had been here last summer. All of that had been happening. I kept talking to Josie, telling her this and that, and this place had only been mine for a month or two, but now it was ours. And she sank down on the couch, nodding, watching the fire. "Is it still mine?" I asked the old man. "Mine just for this winter?" A thin flame curled up from somewhere underneath the logs, and Josie clapped her hands. "Fire!" The old man's wooden floor shone with a rosy gleam, and my eyes began to close as my fingers warmed, but I couldn't fall asleep yet. I settled Josie on the couch and found an old towel to dry her feet. They were mottled from the cold. "Skinny as a bird," I told her as I rubbed them. She put her head back, asleep again. In the kitchen, I used the same towel to close the opening in the missing window pane. While we were here, I'd figured out how to replace that. There was glass in the shed. I'd seen the old man measuring and cutting. I climbed the stairs to the little green room that had been mine. Everything was just the same. The dresser mirror reflected my old sneakers, just visible under the edge of the bumpy white bedspread. The curtains, pink with roses, looped back, and the drawing box on the dresser. The drawing box. I ran my fingers over that half-open box, pencils spilling out. French blue, geranium red. It was hard to swallow. I touched all of the pencils, the pad of paper, the sharpener. Henry and I made 4 or 5 trips back to the car for things that I had taken from Josie's house. Steam came from my mouth in small white puffs, and from the chimney in larger ones. But the cold didn't bother Henry. He pranced through the snow, chasing twigs and a few crumpled leaves as if he were a kitten. He must have known what I was thinking. He sneaked to look back at me and sat up on a rock perfectly still like the old cat he was. "I draw that letter, Henry," I thought, Henry happy in the dark, with the river just a thread curving through the snow. It took a half hour to bring everything inside. I wrapped a blanket around Josie, and through the window I could see the car at the edge of the road. There'd be room for it in the shed, I thought, remembering the old man's car on one side, the truck on the other. The truck. Totaled. Was it still there? I shook my head. "I'll be back," I said to the sleeping Josie. "I have to put the silver bullet in the shed." "You're going to drive it in?" Stephen asked in my head. "You taught me how," I said. "But I can do this." The truck hugged one side of the shed. I walked around to the front of it and ran my fingers over the cold metal, the sharp edges, the empty holes where the lights had been. I raised my hands to my ears without thinking, so I wouldn't hear the sound of the truck as it hit the trees that summer evening. Outside a few minutes later, I turned the key on the silver bullet's ignition. The gas gauge was hitting empty. Just one more bit, I begged that car. That's all I need. I sat there hesitating before I put my foot in the gas. But then I coasted along over the snow, the motor coughing, and glided into the shed, not touching the sides, not even close. Braked a split second before I hit the back wall and turned off the motor. Ah, said Stephen. It was quiet, with only the soft whoosh of wind and the muffled sound of icy snow as it blew against the roof. I had done it. All I wanted to do now was curl up under the covers in that small green room upstairs and sleep.